I want to hear cannons. Downfield, pull up, ball to the 5, touchdown Tampa Bay. Mike Evans does it again. Fire the cannons, Bucs.
It's first and goal. That's picked off. That's picked off. And who else? Rondé Barber. And the Tampa Bay Buccaneers may ride to the Super Bowl with that one.
Third down, 18. Dropping Gannon, looking Gannon. Those up with the head. It's 40. Derek Brooks 30. Brooks to the 25. 20. Derek Brooks all the way. There it is. The dagger's in. We're going to win the Super Bowl. And then the cannons come. Fire them. Keep on firing them. Keep on firing them.
Hello and welcome back. Hello and welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to a brand new edition of the Cannon Fire Podcast. I'm your host, Rhett Matthew, joined alongside me, my good buddy and co-host from BucsNation.com, Evan Wanish. Shaking off the rust here. I don't know what happened on the intro there. It wasn't as smooth as it normally is, but, you know, got to adjust the microphone for dramatic effect. Evan, regardless of how long it's been since the last time we've done a show, I'm very happy to see you and very excited to dive into Tampa Bay Buccaneers mandatory OTAs this week.
Yeah, finally something actually football to talk about, right? I think it's been, and we were actually talking about this before the show. This is going to be, I believe, the last sort of football stuff, actual football stuff before training camp. So kind of going to just go over it. And I mean, we're not going to be talking about, oh, this player was great and this player's winning this battle. It's more so who looks good in shorts, who doesn't. And then there's actually some storylines. Some not as good as others, as we will get into. But yeah, there's actually been some storylines to chat about and stuff you probably wouldn't want to, because it's not necessarily quite about the team on the field. It's more so some stuff off the field and a distraction, I guess you could say. But there's also some stuff, you know, the Buccaneers made a signing this past week, and not just any signing, you know, like a signing of a guy who's like most people are going to recognize the name, you know. So, there is a good bit to talk about, especially for early June, right? And typically around this time, you don't get to talk about a ton. So we are very thankful for some news coming out.
Yeah, they call it the summer sabbatical. Basically, what the dead period is between the end of mandatory minicamp here, which we are in the middle of, and then the start of training camp. Because this week is really the last organized football activity the Bucs are going to have together until late July. So we're going to catch you up on everything you need to know. But as the title suggests, there is a lot of news happening with a player outside of training camp. And I say outside of training camp because he just hasn't shown up yet. No call, no show for the first 2 days of the 3-day camp. That is outside linebacker Randy Gregory, who is in the middle of a lawsuit with the NFL. So I guess, you know, you don't have to think too hard about why he may or may not be showing up. But yeah, former Broncos pass rusher Randy Gregory has filed a lawsuit against the NFL and the team, claiming discrimination for being fined more than $500,000 in the past year, plus for taking medications for disabilities that include THC. Now, Todd Bowles had spoken up and said that these are unexcused absences. I think the Bucs may or may not have been expecting him. Regardless of the lawsuit, it's going to go down. It's going to go down as an unexcused absence. And for Randy Gregory, a guy who hasn't even stepped onto the field yet for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, he's looking at potentially over $100,000 in fines if he misses all 3 days of camp here.
Not the best impression. No, not the best first. I could think of better ways to make a first impression. Yeah, it's like showing up to your girlfriend's, you know, parents' house and you just forget their names, right? You just, yeah, the first time you're ever meeting them, or you just no show, right? That's basically what it is. First day on the job and a new job, and you just decide not to come. I don't think it has anything to do with the Buccaneers, really. I don't think it has anything to do with Todd Bowles or anything like that. I do think that the lawsuit has something to do with it. And look, I'm not a lawyer. You're not a lawyer. We're not legal experts in any sense. So we're not really going to talk about the details of a lawsuit per se, but it's he's technically suing the NFL. Like, so maybe he feels, and I think he's allowed to come to practice, or else it would be technically, it should be excused at least if he wasn't allowed. But since he's suing the league, I guess he sort of figures that it'd be best for him not to show up. And I mean, that's his decision, but at the same time, you're going to face the consequences. And I know a lot of people have said, oh, cut him, right? Oh, you have a disaster sign, one, they signed him to like a 1 year, close to vet minimum deal. I think it's like $5 million or something. Not a ton of money. And two, I don't think the Buccaneers are going to cut him because I don't think they're probably not pleased, but because at the end of the day, it is an unexcused absence, but they're going to fine him and they'll pay the fine, and that'll be that. If he doesn't show up to training camp, that we have more of an issue. Then you could be talking about, okay, what's this guy's future with the team? But at the same time, I do wonder how much of this whole lawsuit thing is playing into it. And it does suck that we can't really, because we don't know all the details of the lawsuit, right? We don't know all the fine print. So we can't really dive into why that would be the case or how that would be the case. But I do think, and this is, again, purely speculatory, but I do think the lawsuit has more to do with this. I don't think it's he's mad at the Buccaneers. He's mad at Todd Bowles. He hates his team. Whatever. Or he regrets signing. I don't think it's any of that. I just think it's the circumstances that he has himself in right now. And I think until that is resolved one way or another, I don't know if you're going to be seeing him much.
Yeah, and I mean, you have to prepare yourself, I guess, to some degree for what potentially may happen if he doesn't end up playing for the Bucs. I don't think it's going to get to that point, like you said. I think the Bucs end up hanging on to him one way or another, but you look at the depth along that defensive line, and especially at edge rusher. You've got second-year edge rusher Yaya Diaby, Randy Gregory, of course, there. Marquise Watt's going to be back, still on the roster. Antonio Greer Jr. as of right now, but KJ Britt, JJ Russell, V Jones, and then the rookie as well, the edge rusher
Chris Braswell, yep,
out of Alabama, who did get some high praise this week from Yaya Diaby. So, I mean, when you look at this edge rusher room, when you look at what the Bucs have on defensive line, we'll talk about some other spots on the defensive line here shortly, but how do you feel about the rest of this room if you take Gregory out of the equation?
Not great, because I was of the mindset, that's one of the reasons I praised the Gregory signing, right, was because I was of the mindset that they needed a veteran pass rusher, even if it wasn't a dynamic piece, right, a guy who's going to go get you 10 sacks. I didn't think they needed that, but I think they needed to add to that veteran in the room, and they did that. And if that veteran is all of a sudden not a part of the solution or this situation, then if I'm the Buccaneers, look, if you don't think he's going to play for you, I'd cut him and I'd sign another guy right now. Like, Yannick Ngakoue's still out there. I don't have the exact list in front of me, but there's still a couple guys that are available right now. And, we'll see what happens. Like we both said, don't think it'll get to that point. I do think Randy Gregory's going to play for the Buccaneers, but if he doesn't, how it would have me feeling about the outside linebacker room? I mean, you would basically have, like you mentioned, Yaya Diaby, Chris Braswell, Anthony Nelson, Joe Tryon-Shoyinka, your main four. And then you got guys like Marquise Watts in there to fill in for depth. But I don't know how to feel about that group, right? Joe Tryon-Shoyinka has been very underwhelming in his NFL career. Anthony Nelson is more of a rotational player. And, Braswell's a rookie. Yaya Diaby's only a second-year player. Are we sure? Is he going to keep progressing? Is he going to stay the same? Is he going to regress? It's very possible. So to me, it would be worrisome. Now, I'm not saying that if Randy Gregory's on the team, all is saved. No, I still have concerns. Even if Gregory is there, I have concerns about the outside linebacker room. But it would just be very much magnified if Randy Gregory would not be there.
Now, I know preseason overreactions tend to make characters out of these guys, but some guys who are still on the roster and I think have made headlines before, I'm looking at Marquise Watts in particular. JTS, last year headed into the season, or even the year before, should have been in this conversation, but I feel like we know what to expect with a guy like him. But I look at Marquise Watts and I guess even Braswell as a rookie. Do you expect a jump in development for any of these guys who have kind of stuck around? Because, again, I think Marquise Watts, J.J. Russell, another name, are these guys that could develop and maybe start to show up here more.
Yeah, J.J. Russell's a guy who's more of an inside linebacker. Marquise Watts is the name I think they've kind of maybe hoping, right, that he could be a guy who's a preseason standout, right? A guy who a lot of people are talking about. Yeah, always every year there's always them couple of names where fans, they see in the headlines he has a few good practices and then maybe makes a play or two in a game. And Marquise Watts has been pretty good, right? The Buccaneers have held on to him for I believe 2 seasons now.
Jose Ramirez, another name on there.
Yeah,
I forgot him.
So I mean, those two guys are more so development guys. I think Marquise Watts is probably ahead of Jose Ramirez right now, in terms of where the depth chart is and where the development is. So I do think if one of those guys would step up, I think it would be a pleasant surprise. I don't think it's something that the Bucs are counting on, but you never know. You really never know who's going to shine in these preseason games, who's going to pop out. But also, preseason games are great. They give you a look. At the same time, though, you sort of take them with a grain of salt at times because you can see how many times we've seen a dude dominate in the preseason, and not just with the Buccaneers, but with the NFL in general, right? Seen a dude dominate in the preseason, and it just doesn't work out. You see it, and not just football. I mean, baseball. There's guys that hit freaking 400 in spring training, right? And then they make the roster, and then they hit 167, and they're sent down to AAA, right? So basically, it happens. I would just say, be the hype, right, and the excitement. I would say be headed with caution, basically. Just know in the back of your head, like, okay, if Marquise Watts is great, like it'd be a pleasant surprise, if he could contribute a good bit or a bit more, I guess I could say, to the Buccaneers in 2024. And look, he may have to, right? If Randy Gregory's not involved, if there's an injury involved there, right, whether to Yaya Diaby or Drew Shrink, Anthony Nelson, Chris Braswell, whoever it may be, all of a sudden, yeah, Marquise Watts might be playing a much bigger role than expected. So you are hoping that that dude can take another step, and a guy like maybe Jose Ramirez, who was a draft pick of theirs, can take another step as well. So we'll see how it goes, and I do think it'll be an important preseason. I think for one of those guys, because I think one of them is going to make the roster. And I'm not sure if the other one does.
Another guy making headlines along that defensive line is Vita Vea. Man, slimmed down quite a bit. I think he's still listed at 347 on the stat sheet there, but he is slimmed down, and part of that in due to some training camps in Portland, Oregon, with former Buccaneers defensive tackle, Super Bowl champion, Ndamukong Suh. And I got to tell you, man, one of the biggest things I miss about having Suh in Tampa is just the interactions that we got to see on social media between Vita Vea and Suh. There was one time in particular, I think it was camp, they had designated carts, and they had the Suh-mobile, and it had one of those big head cutouts of Ndamukong Suh just slapped on the front of a golf cart. But I miss those two together. But some extra training sessions in for Vita Vea, coming in noticeably slimmer, but I have to think he's still going to be just as much of a monster as he has been these last couple of seasons for Tampa. What do you think of skinny Vita?
Don't love it.
No?
not gonna lie. Don't love it. I don't think it's gonna make him a terrible football player, but to me, you're gonna be skinnier. Okay, like that's great, but like how much more explosive is he gonna be, right? Like, was that a way did you get skinnier to try and improve your pass rush skills? Did you try to get more explosive off the line? Your first step, to me, I would much rather have Vita Vea just be the bulky guy that's going to take up multiple blockers. You're going to have to double team. I'm not saying he's not strong anymore, but it's something about having that, that guy up the middle as big as he was, right? And I'm not saying he's miniature now, right? But he is significantly slimmed down. You can tell, right? Like if you just look at a picture of him, like Google, OTA pictures from 2024. If you see one picture of him from the last 2 days, you're going to be able to tell, right? It's pretty obvious. And again, I'm not saying all of a sudden, he's just going to be this weakling, right? But to me, I would much rather prefer the Vita Vea. That's just a big dude clogging up the middle and a guy you can't run on. Now, he may still be that guy. He may still be. He may be better because of it. I'm not doubting that. It's just there is a little bit in the back of my head. Like, does he lose a little bit of that edge? Does he lose a little bit of that advantage that he had over a lot of linemen with his size and strength? Does that go away a little bit? But hey, if it goes away a little bit, but his like pressure production and his sack production increase a little bit, I probably would take that trade off.
Yeah, and 29 years old, coming up on 30. I don't know if he's gonna. I don't want to say that he's going to gain any speed, but at the other end of the spectrum, you do have to wonder if he is going to gain anything. Are we going to see more intensity? Are we going to see better pass rush skills? Because I think for a little while last season, he led the team in sacks.
Yeah, a little bit. I think he started off hot.
Yeah.
If I remember correctly, he started off hot, and then he sort of tailed off a little bit. But yeah, I mean, he's always been a okay pass rusher, right? But that's also wasn't what he was pre-draft. Like, it wasn't like this guy. Oh, this guy's going to be, like, that's not what they drafted him to be. That's not what they signed to an extension to be. Like, so it's not his calling card, but it doesn't have to be. So if that can give him a little bit of a boost, sure. I just, in the back of my head, I am a little bit not really concerned is even the word, but just like curious, I guess you could say. Like, how is this going to work out?
No, I completely understand, because you think about just how widely regarded he's been around the NFL as one of the better nose tackles in the NFL. His ability as a run stuffer. The Buccaneers' run defense being what it is with him on the field these last couple of years, even though it's kind of gone up and down from where it was in 2019, 2020, he's still a force, and he is still a big part of that Buccaneers defensive line. But when you look at the contract, when you look at the accolades he has been given, it isn't because of his pass rush skills. Those are just kind of a plus. So it'll be interesting, especially when you look at what else the Bucs have at that position. You still got Greg Gaines coming back, I believe. Will Golston will be back in time for training camp. And then you've got Logan Hall, which, let me get your 2 cents on Logan Hall really quick, because I think, I hate to say it, but I don't think expectations have ever been lower for Logan Hall in the NFL.
Yeah. Yeah, he's a guy. Obviously I didn't, and I'm not trying to dunk on a dude, but I didn't love the draft pick when they made it, right? It seemed like it was a project. It seemed like he wasn't going to be a finished project, if that, for a long time. And his first year, he didn't really play many snaps. The Bucs still had, sort of a lot of guys there. They're still trying to win with a lot of veterans and stuff like that. They signed, Akeem Hicks and stuff to play that middle, and they had Vita there and everything. But then, his second year, they were hoping he'd make a little bit of a jump. And I don't think they were hoping that, that he was going to be the star player, but I think they were hoping to see a little bit more than they did last year out of Logan Hall. And yeah, I don't think he's in danger of getting cut. I don't, but I do think it's sort of a make or break year to where, like, yeah, like they could, and it sucks because they've kind of prioritized it anyway, but like they might have to make finding another interior guy a priority in the 2025 offseason should Logan Hall continue to not develop. And then you're talking about Logan Hall potentially not making the roster in 2025, potentially being a cut candidate. So he's entering year 3. He hasn't really shown you much. And at this point, I don't really want to say he is what he is, because I don't like to judge players until after their third year, but I mean, you got to show me something, and Logan Hall just hasn't shown me anything. So, I mean, luckily the Bucs have Kalijah Kancey up there in the middle as well, because if they didn't, I think they'd be in real trouble with just Vita.
Let's talk about the other side of the football here, and some big news, a roster acquisition for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but this kind of reminds me of some of those signings the Bucs would make closer to camp in the Brady era, where it's just kind of like a name,
yeah,
and people
You're
get
like, oh, wow, okay.
pumped. Yeah, I definitely didn't expect to see Sterling Shepard in a Tampa Bay Buccaneers uniform, the former New York Giants second-round pick, but the Bucs signed him last week, made it official on Monday. It's a 1-year deal, and drafted in 2016. I mean, expectations are seemingly all over the place with this guy. The big news is the reunion with Baker Mayfield. They were a 1-2 punch in that Oklahoma offense. You remember he had that huge game. I think it was like 200-plus yards against Baylor that one time in the rain. One of the best performances of Baker's college career for sure. But I think you bring him into Tampa, you look at where they are, the departure of Devin Tompkins, we don't really have to get into that, but an injury designation for him. So he's gone. You got Trey Palmer still. You've got a couple of rookies on the roster as well. Where does Sterling Shepard fit in? Where are your expectations for him? Because I know that, injuries have really been a problem for him these last couple of seasons, but whenever he is available and on the field, he hasn't done very much. Well, with all due respect, he was in New York with Daniel Jones as his quarterback. So when you look at the depth chart, one, is he going to make the roster? Because I definitely think he is. Chase Edmonds went on Twitter and said he's definitely going to make the roster. I know he doesn't make personnel decisions, but he might have insight into that. And what are your expectations? Do you think he could potentially come in here? And I don't know about a career resurgence, don't get me wrong, but could he be of good use to the Bucs at wide receiver 3, maybe 4?
Well, I know he's going to be the wide receiver 3. I would have to imagine that both Trey Palmer and Jalen McMillan will be ahead of him, especially Jalen McMillan. They invested the top 100 draft pick in him. So I don't think that you are right. He had success in New York last 2 seasons, though. Battled injuries a little bit, but just like you said, when he was on the field, it's not like he was lighting the world up, right? Over the last 2 seasons combined, he's had 23 catches for 211 yards. So not exactly, and he's had 2 touchdowns, 1 touchdown each year. So not exactly great, but at the same time, look, there's a reason he was available in June, right? Like there was a reason that he was available at this point in the offseason. There always is, right? There's always a reason that these guys, these free agents are available at this point. There was a reason that, when you look at your phone one day and the Bucs signed Julio Jones, well, maybe Julio Jones is cooked because they signed him 2 days before training camp. There's a reason, right? And I'm not saying Sterling Shepard is cooked, and the Bucs are trying to find that out, right? It's a very low risk move. It's for the veteran minimum. You can cut him if he sucks, but if it works out, you could have tremendous depth in your wide receiver room, right? I mean, you're talking about, we talk about Mike Evans, Chris Godwin a lot, but I mean, you'd have a back half of Jalen McMillan, Trey Palmer, Sterling Shepard in no particular order there.
Raheem Jarrett as well going to be in the
mix.
Yeah,
I mean, Jarrett could be there. I do expect them to probably carry 6 wide receivers. So I think if they were to carry that number 6, I think that'd probably be the 6. I don't think that, he's in danger. I think he'd have to be pretty bad to be in danger of getting cut. Now, how much he plays in the regular season, that remains to be seen. I do think I compared it to kind of similar to the David Moore signing last season, where I think if Dave Canales would have stayed in Tampa Bay, I think they would have never signed Sterling Shepard because I think they would have re-signed David Moore, to be honest with you. But David Moore, he played a little bit, but he didn't play a ton, and I think that's going to be a similar role that Shepard played here, just being that veteran in a room. And look, I mean, Mike Evans and Chris Godwin are 2 veterans. They've been there, done that, won Super Bowl, but Trey Palmer and Jalen McMillan and even Raheem Jarrett are really young players, right? So I don't think having more veteran talent in that room is a bad thing. And it did kind of catch me by surprise. I didn't expect them to add a wide receiver at this point in the offseason, but I do think, like I said, it's a very low risk thing. It's not, to me, it's not going to kill him if it doesn't work out, right? If Sterling Shepard is just who he was the last 2 years in New York, that's who he is. Okay, you still got 4 other dudes that I think can be pretty good. So it is not going to kill him if it doesn't work out. And I know there were some people on the video that we posted about it, he probably not even going to make the team, might not make the team. I do expect him to make the roster. Now what he does contribute in the regular season, that remains to be seen. But I do think it's a win-win, right? Because for Sterling Shepard, he gets to reunite with Baker Mayfield. And for the Bucs, you get low risk, cheap veteran depth, and that's fine to me.
At the end of the season, as we keep the discussion on the wide receiver room, at the end of 2024, which receiver do you think is going to have had the bigger impact on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers? Is it going to be Trey Palmer or Jalen McMillan?
McMillan. Yeah, I do think it's McMillan. I don't think McMillan's going to be given the wide receiver job, like wide receiver 3 job, right out of the gates. But I do think it's going to be one of those things where over time, for one, I do think McMillan's going to be, I think Palmer is too, but I think McMillan's going to be one of those guys in training camp that you'll see written about and being like, oh, wow, this dude is just making plays after play after play. Just like Palmer was last year as a rookie, right? I think McMillan's going to be very similar. And I do think as time goes on, as the season goes on, I think McMillan's going to get more opportunity. And look, they drafted him with a top 100 draft pick. Like they clearly like him, like they clearly have plans for him to be a contributor, right? For them. Like Trey Palmer was a great draft pick. He was a 6th-round pick though at the end of the day, right? Like I'm not sure the Buccaneers, especially since they had Russell Gage at the time, all right, and Russell Gage goes down and Trey Palmer all of a sudden has to play a much bigger role, but I don't think the Buccaneers intended for, Trey Palmer to be, as good as he was in his rookie season. That's great, right? That helps. But, I also think that they have pretty high hopes for a guy like McMillan. So we'll see. I do think at the end of the day, though, even if McMillan gets off to a slower start, I do think it might be a little bit of an adjustment to the NFL. But I do think by the end of the day, you're going to look at it, you're going to say, you're by the end of the year, you're gonna be okay. Like he's the wide receiver 3, and potentially we've talked about this before. And I know it's not a slam dunk that this guy is gonna not be in Tampa Bay, but potentially, you're hoping to almost end this year thinking, okay, wide receiver 3, sure, but he has another year of development. Maybe he can be the wide receiver 2 on this team, which he may need to be, right? Yeah. If Chris Godwin departs. So, and having Trey Palmer as your wide receiver 3 and McMillan as your wide receiver 2 might not be a bad thing. So, we will see what happens there. But I do think that by the end of the year, McMillan is going to be viewed as the guy that's like the wide receiver 3, and Palmer's just going to be a pretty darn good wide receiver for him, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. I do agree. And I say that because I don't want to talk about ceilings, but when you talk about how the Bucs may potentially want to feature a McMillan on the field, and Trey Palmer, let's be honest, after that playoff game against Detroit, I don't remember too many people headed into the offseason super pleased with him. So I think when you do look at this wide receiver room, it's going to be stiff because Trey Palmer is a very talented player. And I think early in the season, we're going to see some nice plays with him. Hopefully, the chemistry between him and Baker Mayfield gets that much better. And in this new offense, you can start to find roles for these guys who have shown that they can make plays in the past. Raheem Jarrett, we talked about him as well. It'd be cool to see him catch a touchdown in Week 7. You know what I mean? Like just keeping things fresh enough to keep these guys in the rotation. But I agree about McMillan. Charles Jansen in chat agrees as well. He says early in the season, it's going to be Palmer. By the end of the season, it will be McMillan. Talking again about the rookie wide receiver, Jalen McMillan, the departure of Devin Tompkins left some questions about the return position, and it seems like McMillan might be the early favorite about Camp Body potentially returning kicks for the Bucs. Seemingly, Jordan Whitehead was out there returning kicks as well, maybe just for fun.
Well, there you go.
I hope just for fun because I definitely
you're starting strong. I don't prefer my starting strong safety to your returning kicks, but
I definitely hope that doesn't happen. But you think about McMillan at returner. Are there any other guys on the roster, not to put you on the spot, that could be candidates come training camp?
Yeah, I mean, I do think Jarrett could be a potential candidate there. Especially if he's going to stick, like that might be the way he sticks. That might be the way. I don't think Sterling Shepard. I don't think he can do it. Maybe Bucky Irving. I mean, I do think they want to feature Bucky Irving in more of a running back role than a returner. So I don't know how often he'd put him out there, but I think he could do it. But I would say Jarrett, I think, especially if Jarrett is going to find a way to stay on the roster, I think it's going to be because he can at least be somewhat competent, right? They don't really have a dude on there that I look at. It's like, oh, he's a threat, right? Like he's a weapon back there. Tompkins was okay, he was decent, but I also think if you compare him to other teams, the Bucs have been so poor at that for so long that Tompkins being average or maybe sometimes slightly above average was like a breath of fresh air, right? Because that position has been so poor for the Bucs for a long time. I mean, so they had obviously the Michael Spurlock thing was the first one. Have they had one since?
Michael Spurlock, Deshaun Jackson against Pittsburgh got called back.
That was a punt return, not a kick return.
Oh, you're right.
They've had a few punt returns. I don't know if they've ever had a kick return. No, I know also the kick thing has changed with the guys kicking the ball at the back of the end zone. It has changed, but I don't know if they have, right? So like they have, even in their history, they haven't had much of a weapon there.
Here's a name for you. I think Clifton Smith may have possibly been the last guy to do it. It was either Spurlock or Clifton Smith.
Okay.
Who were the last guy to do it.
Yeah, so they haven't really had Charles Jansen in the chat also says Clifton Smith as well. So it might be Clifton Smith. They haven't really had that guy, right? And I think if Jarrett can show you some flashes in camp, he might be the guy. But again, Bucky Irving, I do think would be an option as well.
Hey, we talked about Vita slimming down at the top of the show. Get him back there returning.
Yeah, why not?
All right,
why not?
Let's wrap.
He can break
up.
tackles, that's for sure.
Yeah, it's gonna be tough to bring him down, like the fridge. So let's go ahead and wrap things up with the running back room really quickly. I'm glad you brought up Bucky Irving and the Bucs wanting to use him in more of a running back role. Maybe that's as the game goes on, you start to see him get in and get more snaps. I know early in the season it's going to be interesting to see how they try and fit him in because Rachaad White. We've been talking about expectations this entire show, seemingly coming into this season with maybe the biggest workload he's had. I think the Bucs are kind of expecting him at this point to be a do-it-all back for most of the game.
You want me honest? I don't know. Like, I kind of think they re-signed Chase Edmonds. They drafted Bucky Irving. I viewed last year as kind of them really putting the wagon on him, right?
I think
hitching their wagon to him.
It's important to mention like his genesis, catching the football. He was one hell of a receiving threat out of the backfield for the Bucs last year. But when you talk about, the challenge on the table for Liam Cohen to take this Buccaneers run offense and just make something out of it because it's been towards the bottom of the league.
It was better last year, but that's not saying much, right?
Right. Yeah.
Anything would have been better than what it was in 2022. So, I do think Rachaad White. I think they're hoping he can take another step, but also I think they like Bucky Irving. I think they want to get Bucky Irving a little bit of a look there. And we will see what happens. Now, I know some people in the chat have already pointed this out. Like, the run offense could be better if, with Graham Barton, being a guy there at center, finally having a solution at center. There still are questions at left guard, but if a guy like Sua Opeta or Ben Bredesen takes that job, and they're good enough, the run blocking will naturally improve and the run game will naturally improve. Now, I do have, some concerns about Rachaad White's game is in terms of vision sometimes, in terms of burst, decision-making, just hitting the hole when he needs to. To me, sometimes he sort of is hesitant at times. He's a little bit too patient. But, I do think Bucky Irving is a guy that can kind of be a little bit of a spark plug there. Because there's some games where you can tell if Rachaad White's feeling it, right? He's able to, take the ball out of the backfield, run it, but he's also able to catch the ball out of the backfield, make something happen, make a man miss. But then there's days when you can tell he's just not really on, right? Hopefully on those days, you could have a guy like Bucky Irving in there to sort of take a little bit of the workload off of him and provide a little bit of a spark to the Bucs offense.
Yeah, and in this new offense as well, I hope there's some creativity in the run game. We've been begging. I mean, Canales was one hell of an offensive coordinator, but there were weeks when you think about the first game against Philly, Monday Night Football. I mean,
they were down. They were down like 16, like 7 minutes left in the fourth, and they're still running the ball.
I mean, they were in the red zone, and I think it was like 3rd and 1 or 3rd and 2, maybe 2 to go, and we're running the football out of the shotgun. We did the same thing later on in the season against New Orleans. They were down 20-something points, and
right.
they're running tosses to the left.
Yeah.
And I think some creativity is going to go a long way. So I hope Cohen can bring that to the table with the offensive staff that he's helped assemble under Todd Bowles. And I hope we see something because, again, I think any improvement this year from last year is going to be huge. I think it might even spark a couple of overreactions simply because the Bucs run offense, despite Rachaad White being a bit of a bright spot. I mean, it's just been god-awful these last couple of years. So you got to start somewhere.
Yeah, you gotta start somewhere. And again, you're just hoping it gets a little bit better. It's, it wasn't great last year, but it was improved. And you're hoping, I know it's tough because expectations with another new offensive coordinator, right? For the second year in a row, you're not really exactly sure what to expect out of the run game or out of the offense in general. But yeah, you are hoping it gets a little bit better, and that'll make life easier for not only the offensive coordinator, but also the quarterback. The passing game in general, everybody. It's going to make a life a lot easier if they're able to run the ball better. And you know what? We talk about the Buccaneers really struggling last year against the really elite quarterbacks, right? I wouldn't call Jared Goff really elite, but hey, he diced them up two straight times, right? Every time they played him. Um, he did really well against them. And Josh Allen played pretty well against them. How you keep those guys off the field, you control the football, right? How you control the football, one way to do it is by having a better run game. And the Bucs are playing a lot of elite quarterbacks this coming season. Okay, they have Patrick Mahomes, they got Lamar Jackson, they got Brock Purdy. I mean, Kirk Cousins isn't exactly elite to me, but he's still very good. They played Jared Goff again. Like, they have a lot of dudes that are coming up on that schedule that are really good, right? Justin Herbert is another name that's going to come up. They have a lot of guys, right? They played Jalen Hurts again. There's a lot of guys, and I think one way to help, right, to help your defense out as well, right? We talk about how it's going to help the offense and open up this and that. I think it's going to help your defense also. So, a better run game, I think. While it's not the end all be all, and I'm still of the mindset that look, this is a passing league. If you can't pass the ball when you need to, you're not going to win, right? You still have to win, I think, by putting the ball in the air. You just paid Baker Mayfield a boatload of money. You're paying Mike Evans and Chris Godwin a boatload of money. Use them, right? But at the same time, it's definitely going to help by having that more established and more consistent run game.
Yeah, you just listed all those guys the Bucs are going to be facing this season. I want to ask you about Tampa's guy. Just got the contract, multi-year extension for quarterback Baker Mayfield. I feel like we've hardly talked about him this show, so we will wrap up with this. Your expectations for Baker. I mean, you just listed some of the opponents he's going to have to outduel seemingly, and he stepped up at times for the Buccaneers last year, but you could tell there are still some things that Baker needs to work on as a former number one overall pick. What are your expectations after the contract extension and, hopefully building a roster, an offense that's going to serve him better than the one last year?
Yeah, it's tough because again, we're entering another year with a new offensive coordinator, right? And you really wish that Dave Canales would have been able to stick around, because I do think you could have more of an idea, right? Um, the talent's there. We saw that. The issue has been in Baker Mayfield's career has been consistency, though, right? It's been consistency and injuries. He pretty much avoided the injury bug last year. Got a little bit banged up here and there, but never missed a start. I know he missed a couple of plays in that Indy game, I Bleav. He got hurt on that quarterback sneak, but other than that, he played every snap. Um, but the bigger issue has been consistency and putting together back-to-back good seasons. Last year he was good. This year, what's it going to be, right? And this year, I actually think there's more pressure on him this year than there was last year.
Yeah.
Last year, he was on a 1-year deal for whatever, $4 million. If it didn't work, the Bucs were going to suck. They were going to pick high. They were going to pick a quarterback, and Baker Mayfield would have been out of there. And it would have been like, okay, Baker Mayfield didn't work, is what it is. Now, if he's not good, he's got a big cap hit attached to him now. And yes, the Buccaneers could move on after year one, but they're probably stuck with him for a second year regardless, right? So I do Bleav there's more pressure on him now to actually be good because the expectations are going to be raised, right? Like he got to the second round of the playoffs, the divisional round, right? One quarter away, right? You lost by one possession, I Bleav, in that divisional round game from going to the NFC title game. You made the Pro Bowl. I mean, the expectations are going to be raised, and I do think that you have to. Yeah, I don't want to say really settle down expectations, because to me, like, okay, your expectations, oh, you expect an NFC championship game. Not necessarily that, but individually wise, I think Baker Mayfield has to be a bit better than he was last year, because you know what? He's being paid like it now. So I do think, does he have to be an elite quarterback? No, but I do think there were times last year where he was not very good. And there were times where, he not necessarily single-handedly cost them a game, but there were times where if he played a little bit better, maybe they win, right? I think the Atlanta game in Tampa, the first Atlanta game, if he plays a little bit better, they probably win, especially against a lot of the better teams that they played early in the year, right? When they were struggling to beat any team over 500. That Detroit game with the creamsicles, right? Look, man, I know Jared Goff passed all over him. I know the defense wasn't great, but the defense kept holding Detroit to field goals, and that might have been one of Baker Mayfield's worst games. Not statistically wise, but he missed so many deep balls. He needs to be better. You need to eliminate those types of games in year two, because it is year two, and guess what? Now you're being paid a whole lot more money to do this. So, expectations for him, I would say honestly. Again, it's tough, but I do think he's going to be relatively okay. I do think he's going to go out there and have a terrible season. Do I think he's going to improve on what he did last year? I don't know. I do think it could be a lot similar to what it was last year. Good but not great, and that's okay. At the end of the day, what do we talk about when he signed that deal? He's like the 17th highest paid quarterback or whatever, right? Pretty average, right? It's like right in the middle. Like, okay, that's fine. But you just hope at the end of the year you don't have any questions about who your starter is in 2025. That's what you hope is, right? That your hope is that for the first round of the NFL draft, you're not wondering, oh, should they take a quarterback? Like that's what your hope has to be. That's definitively, like, no, you got Baker for at least another year. Let's see how that goes. That's what your hope has got to be. And we'll see what happens, because consistency, like I said, has been a big issue with Baker in his career.
Yeah, I've said it before on this show, and I will say it one more time. I like Baker. I have hitched my wagon to Baker Mayfield as the Tampa Bay Buccaneers quarterback. I do believe that this team can have success with Baker Mayfield at quarterback. I think there's a lot of good that he put out on tape. He showed us. I mean, perfect passer rating on the road in Lambeau in December. We were talking about that Green Bay game all year long, and they're gonna have to go play in December, and it's gonna be cold. And blah, blah.
Yeah.
I mean, he tore him up, dude, and he followed it up.
Perfect passer rating.
Yeah, he followed it up the next week, played just as good against Jacksonville. I know they were a beat-up team, but they took advantage. They jumped on it, and that's exactly what you needed that offense to do that week. So, there are times where he's got to get better. But I think when you look at the situation he's coming into, there's a lot that can be said about the consistency or the lack thereof that he has had. 8 head coaches in 6 seasons is insane for any player, especially a quarterback.
And even more offensive coordinators. So.
Yeah. A fine-tuned version of last year's offense. I know there's similarities, but it's a new offensive coordinator for him. Mm-hmm. But I do think looking around, there's a lot of things going for him, right? You would think the chemistry with the guys on the offense, his top 3-4 pass catchers,
that shouldn't be an issue.
Yeah. Mike Evans,
there's no excuse for that to be an issue.
Yeah, Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Trey Palmer, even at the tight end position, K. Dotton really broke out a little bit second half of the season.
Rashad White, he relied on Rashad White a lot in the passing game.
Wide receiver 5 is Sterling Shepard. I mean, they haven't played together in a couple of years, but this is a guy that I have to believe that during this sabbatical we're about to go on to until training camp, they'll probably be training together. I have to assume. They're boys, right? So I believe in Baker. I think he can play well. I think he can play well enough for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers to win the NFC South for another year in a row. I truly do. But we've talked a lot about the run game today. We've talked about a lot about the run blocking. I think a good run game is going to alleviate a lot of this pressure that we talk about on Baker Mayfield, because if this run game looks exactly like it did last year and the year before, he's going to have to consistently play like one of the better quarterbacks in the NFL, and he's going to have to throw the ball well, like you said.
Yeah, and it's like I talked about earlier with the running, and it helps everybody, right? It really does. It not only helps the running backs, helps the offensive line, but it helps that quarterback. It helps play action, and in a way, it helps the defense. So we will see. It's tough because, the questions we're going to be asking ourselves right now and over the course of the next month and a half, 2 months is stuff we're not going to have any answers for, right? Until the season actually starts. So it is going to be tough because we don't know, right? Like we don't know how the run game's going to look. We don't know how the exact offense is going to look, right? It's not even the same offensive coordinator. So we will see.
Gotta quit hanging on to the ball too long too. That's one more thing.
Yeah.
We got to be transparent.
Honestly, that's just, I think it's something that might just be him. You just might have to deal with. It's like with like bowls with the timeouts. Like you might just have to sort of deal with that. To be honest with you.
Yeah. I mean, maybe we'll see an offensive system that prioritizes him getting the football out a little bit quicker, but we just got to wait and see. This is about it. I think we're going to do a show here soon and talk to you guys, maybe take some phone calls as well as we recap mandatory OTAs for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. But after this week, that's it. There is not going to be much football news between now and the end of July when training camp starts back up at Advent Health Training Center. But we will have some fresh content for you guys on the way. And with all of that being said, I think that's going to do it for today's episode of the Cannon Fire Podcast. I want to say thank you to everybody hanging out in the live chat. Al Bundy, Charles Jansen, Sal319, anybody else that I may have missed. Brutal as Bucs also stops by. Good to hear from you guys. Follow the show on social media, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. All of those are Cannon Fire Podcast. Best place to go for updates on the show and, of course, Buccaneer news as it happens. Speaking of Bucs news as it happens, you can follow my co-host Evan on Instagram at Bucs_daily. You can also find him on Twitter at EvanNFL and check out his written work at BucsNation.com. You got anything in the hopper this week?
Going to be looking at, and actually it ties into the channel here. So we're going to be looking at breakout players for the Buccaneers for the season. Also probably going to be looking at training camp battles. I don't know exactly when that's going to be. But then we also have something where I'm going to work on a article for Bucs Nation that's going to be turned into a video on this channel. That's going to be pretty cool. So don't want to reveal too much about that right this second. But in terms of on this channel, I know last year on James's channel, I did something called the positional previews, right? Where I went through each position group and just kind of talk about what the Bucs have in that position, what they added in the offseason, what the expectations are for that group. And we're going to be doing that again here before training camp. I like to do it before the training camp or preseason. And luckily I didn't start it yet because the wide receiver one would have been wrong because they added a pretty significant name there. So they'll be up. So we're not going to have any really shortage of content. The Buccaneers actual football, there's not going to be much to talk about there, but we will have some content out for you guys over the next month and a half before training camp.
Yeah, I got some great stuff on the way. Last but not least, you can find myself on Instagram and Twitter at Reticus, RHETTAKUS. If you follow me, I will follow you back. Thank you once again for hanging out with us. We will talk to you soon about more breaking news about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I'm your host, Rhett Matthews, signing off for my co-host, Evan Wanish. We'll see you in the next one. Until then, and as always, thank you for listening, and go Bucs.